I've mentioned it before, and I want to reiterate that what we don't, like a lot of American commentators don't spend that time enough, is understanding the Chinese economy.
Right.
China is in one of the worst economic downturns that it's had since it globalized. Like, it largely set out the financial crisis. In fact, it benefited in many ways from the financial crisis because every company in the world, that in the Western world, was like, oh my God, our business is going to go bankrupt if we don't cut costs. So they were actually, a lot of the sort of economic crisis that was caused by the financial issues actually accelerated China's manufacturing sector. They actually set out a large degree of the great financial crisis because they were able to offer products far cheaper than American or Western producers were. This time around, it's different.
Right.
What's happening in China is that the government has attacked the private sector so significantly that the consumer economy, the Chinese consumer economy, that was showing great promise 10 years ago, has largely set out. They don't have a strong consumer sector to the degree that we do in the West.
Right.
When anytime you see the US economy slow down, the government stimulates the consumer.
Right.
And frankly, rightfully so, because it works. The Chinese do the opposite. They stimulate the real estate sector, they stimulate the stock market, they do everything to stimulate the top, because it's sort of top-down driven, and state-owned enterprises. And what's happening is it's not working.
Right.
And so they're producing a lot of stimulus to these sectors, but it's not flowing through to consumer consumption, which is what they really need.
Right.
So what's happening is they're producing a lot of exports, because if you're stimulating state-owned enterprises, which is it's very mercantilism in some ways. And so what they're doing is they're creating all of this excess capacity in product, and they have to export it because that's the way they stay in business.
Right.
And so what's happening is Chinese goods are getting cheaper on the global markets, and U.S. retailers, particularly big box retailers, are taking advantage of those deals. That is what's driving a lot of this container flow, combined with threat of tariffs, threat of perhaps a new trade war. All of that is driving it. The strikes and all of that is sort of in the background. But what's happening is really a China story. And that's why container prices have stayed so high, because you need container demand. And that's something that I don't think we factored in, or at least I thought about 4 years ago. We largely thought, or most people thought, that the Chinese economy would come back when everything else came back. And after COVID, it has still not recovered. And it is still, a little bit, but it's still dealing with some very, very fundamental issues that it doesn't seem to really want to fix. It feels to me that China is going to be a very similar story to what happened in Japan, where it just stagnated. They have demographic issues too. Like, you can't discount that. Japan has them as well. But Japan, it took 20 some odd years for them to try to reform their economy, very mercantilism based, and they didn't make significant changes to their economy. And we're seeing the same story play out in China right now, where they're not making the kind of changes to reform their economy, and they're dealing with the pain.